Hello, in today's video we're going to talk about competition in the long run. Basically, we're going to incorporate the ideas that we looked at in the previous 3 or 4 videos into a larger framework of a competitive industry in the long run. This video is going to follow Chapter 9, The Rise and Fall of Industries in Taylor and Wirapana, and we're going to look at 2 questions in particular. First, we're going to derive the long-run competitive equilibrium, and then we're going to look at what happens to the equilibrium in the long run if some of the fundamental parts of the model changes. So first, let's look at the long-run competitive equilibrium. Before we look at any changes to the industry over time, I want to lay out the assumptions that we're going to be following in this model. First of all, we assume that there will be a large number of small firms, and small means that no firm is able to dictate the market its prices. Second, we'll assume that all firms produce identical products so that consumers don't really care which firm to buy from. And finally, we'll assume that entering and exiting the industry is free. So there are no licenses that one has to obtain or no other barriers to entry that you can imagine exist in some other industries. So these are the 3 crucial assumptions, and under these crucial assumptions we can have 2 pictures in mind. One picture is the standard demand and supply picture for the whole market, where the price and quantity traded in the market will be determined by the intersection of demand and supply. And second picture is that from the perspective of the individual firm, it has to follow suit of other small firms in the market. It has to adhere to the running market price. And so we will say that these small firms are price takers, and that the demand that each individual firm in this industry is facing is perfectly elastic. That is, no matter how much or how little you want to sell, you have to be selling at the current going market price, and you don't have a say in what that market price is going to be. Now let's look at an example of how an individual firm operates under such conditions. So suppose that a typical firm will have the following cost curves in the short run. So again, I'm looking at the short run example here because I'm going to see, okay, what happens to the firm at a particular price, and then I'm going to start introducing changes. And once I'm going to be introducing changes, we're going to move from the short run into the long run. So suppose that for now, the market price is 50. So we can think of the demand for the firm's product being steady at the price of 50, no matter how much the firm is going to produce. So let's draw that. This dashed curve would be the perfectly elastic demand for the firm's product. At this price of 50, the firm is going to produce the quantity at which price equals marginal cost. Because remember, the marginal cost is the blue line that's increasing, and it's profitable to produce output until marginal costs finally hit the price level. So the intersection of the individual firm's demand, which is flat at 50, and individual firm's supply, which is its marginal cost, will give you the output that it's going to produce, and that output is going to be 500. So let's mark that. The output is 500. Let's see what happens here. The output is 500. Price that the firm gets, 50, exceeds the average cost that the firm has to pay to produce, which lies on the yellow curve here. And so because the price level is above the average cost level, which is here, the firm is actually going to be earning positive economic profits. And we can mark those with a green box on the graph. Why is the profit equal to the area of the green rectangle that I just shaded? Well, because you can think of a profit as price minus average cost multiplied by quantity. And so clearly the price is at 50, average cost is somewhere between 30 and 40. So the difference between the two is profit per unit, and you're selling 500 units. So this is going to be a profit. And so your profit is positive. And so what is the novelty here? What is the novelty that I want you to think about once we think about the industry in general and not a single firm in particular? And the novelty is that the presence of positive profits is a signal for other firms to enter the industry. If somebody is making money selling output in this industry, well, so can I, because it's free to enter and start your own firm. And so if that is the case, whenever there are positive profits for a typical representative firm in the industry, other firms might want to enter this market as well. So let's go back to the market picture. If firms are making positive profits in the short run, more firms will enter. What does it mean for the whole market if more firms enter? Firms represent the supply side. More firms will mean more supply, so the supply curve is going to shift to the right. But if the supply curve is going to shift to the right, the price has to adjust. With higher supply, price has to go down, so the market price will fall. But remember that each individual firm is a price taker, so it will follow whatever the market price is. So for each individual firm, the price level or the demand for the firm's output is going to fall as well. So here's what's going on. Firms are making profits, more firms enter, price falls. Let's see what happens to our firm. That's the original setup. We were at 50, making profits, but now more firms enter the industry. And suppose that the price drops to 45. So the new price level is lower. Because the new price level is lower, the firm will be forced to reduce its output to the new intersection of demand and marginal costs. So it's going to be somewhere around 450. So assume it's exactly 450. At a lower price, you'll be willing to produce less as an individual firm. Your new output would be smaller, and that output, the average cost might decrease slightly. And if that is the case, usually the price drop is larger than the drop in the average costs, and your profit will go down. But although it will go down, and let's mark it here, looks like, at least visually, it looks like the rectangle is of a smaller size. It's still going to be positive. And positive profit is still an indication for other firms to enter. So more firms will enter even though the price has already fallen. So what is going to happen then? Well, the price is going to fall. As more firms enter, you'll be making smaller profits, producing less and less and less and less, and making even less and less profits until what? The sort of the end point of this process is a situation when you won't be making any profits at all. Because as long as you're making at least, I don't know, $100, $10, $1 of positive profits, it's an indication for the other firms that there is money to be collected in this market. So firms will enter until the price level is so low that it's just going to be tangent to the average cost. So ultimately, the price is gonna go down all the way to the minimum of the average cost. And if you remember from one of the previous videos, it is exactly the case that minimum average cost occurs where marginal costs and average costs intersect. And so at that point, profit are going to reach zero. So firms will stop entering the market, and each firm that is already in the market will be earning zero profits. So the condition that determines the long-run equilibrium price is that the price has to be equal to the minimum average cost. In addition to that, price has to equal the marginal cost because each firm is still trying to maximize their profits. What else? Firm is making zero profits, but that is the best it can do. And the nicest part of this situation is that from the market perspective, the output is produced efficiently. It is the cheapest way possible that you can produce any units of output. Because remember, when we started at the price of 50, output was produced at approximately $35 per unit. But now, when we hit the minimum average cost, it is the cheapest way per unit to produce output. And this is really great. So the competition between firms forces their profits to go to zero, but at the same time, it forces them to find more and more efficient ways of producing the output. And ultimately, in the long run, they settle in the cheapest way possible to produce output. This is the essence of the competitive equilibrium in the long run. And now let's see what happens if something changes to the market in general. So I'm going to redraw the original story. So we'll have the whole market on the left again, and the demand and supply of the individual firm on the right. And in the long run, the price level has to be at the minimum average cost. So where the U-shaped average cost is minimized at the intersection with the blue-shaped marginal cost curve. Firms are only in control of supply, so demand is out of their reach, out of their control. Let's think about what's going to happen to the industry if the market demand decreases for any reason. Well, we'll need to start with the whole market first, and we need to draw a new demand that's going to be smaller than the old demand. If the demand decreases, you know that in competitive market, that means that the equilibrium price is going to fall. So firms are going to be seeing a lower price level for their product, so it will be profitable for them to reduce their outputs. But even if they're reducing their outputs, well, they're making negative profits now because the price that they're seeing does not cover their average costs at any level of production. So if price falls, that means that firms start losing money, and so some firms will start to shut down. In this example, I'm looking at the opposite story. Remember that when we derived the long-run competitive equilibrium, I said, well, if firms are making currently positive profits, other firms will enter. Here, firms are currently making negative profits. They're losing money, so some firms decide to shut down, and some will do it earlier than others. But what happens when firms shut down? That means that on the market level, the supply is going to decrease. And how long the supply is going to decrease for? As the supply decreases, price will ultimately start going back up, but firms will be living all the way until the price reaches the original equilibrium level of minimum average costs. Because up until that point, some firms will be losing money, so some firms will be living. So basically in this story, if the current market price is above the yellow line, it will go back down to that yellow line of minimum average cost. If the market price is below the yellow line, it will ultimately reach the yellow line level of the minimum average cost. So no matter what, no matter what happens to the demand, the supply would readjust so that the equilibrium price in the market is going to be at the yellow level of the minimum average cost. And this is a really interesting specific of this model, that here supply readjusts to the movements of demand to bring the price back to a particular level. And notice that this level does not depend on how much or how little is demanded. The market price ultimately is solely determined by the competition between individual firms.